her to come. I asked her to come pick me up at my hotel and give me a ride to a meeting. So we'd have 20 minutes or so that we could get, caught up during the commute. So she picks me up, and then we get stuck in traffic. And, people in the right-hand lane are not turning right on red. And my mom's getting really upset and really irritated that the people in front of her are not driving the way she thinks they should. And, eventually I said, Mom, the longer this takes, the more time we get to spend together. But I'm not really interested in spending that time together with you yelling at the cars in front of you. I mean, there's nothing that you can do that is going to make them go faster, and you should be grateful that they're going as slow as they are. So shit happens. The way we react to it is really what determines the way that it affects us. And I like to use this, little mnemonic, right? We all use the word responsibility all the time, but rarely do we actually parse the word into its component parts, right? Responsibility is our ability to control our response, right? So take responsibility for your thoughts, your actions, your emotions, right? Responsibility is our ability to control our response. It's essentially the stimulus and response model, right? Stimulus, shit happens, right? And then we have the freedom to choose how we respond to that stimulus. This is like we were talking with Diane earlier, this is a function of maturity, right? Maturity in the stimulus and response model gives you the freedom to choose how you react to any given situation. You can think about it as the ability to subordinate an impulse to a value, right? You can write that down. The ability to subordinate an impulse to a value. Our impulses might lead us to respond in a negative fashion, but our values, if we're leaning heavy on them, may provide us with the freedom to respond in a different fashion. This is self-awareness and independent will. Anybody have any thoughts on this concept of the 90-10 principle? Do you know people in your life that get thrown off kilter by little things, right? And the smallest little speed bump can send them into a tailspin.
The thing that I notice the most about this rule is, and I think about it all the time, it's one of those rules I live with in my head. It's a lot harder to do than it sounds. It takes tremendous discipline. It sounds so simple, but it actually can be very difficult to do sometimes.
I think even though we all still react impulsively sometimes, I think a huge factor in how much we do so is the kind of modeling that we've seen. I think when you maybe grow up or spend a large portion of your life around people who are really emotionally reactive and impulsive, it's really hard to recognize that there's another way to respond to a situation. I know I've had kind of people on both ends of the spectrum in my life, and something I've really come to value, even just in the past couple of years, is people who not necessarily are like blindly optimistic or happy, but just are realistically adaptable and able to problem solve when things come up. And I think it's a mixture of the role models that you have and also the experiences. The more that people have experiences that put them out of their comfort zone, the more they realize it's not worth the stress to get bent out of shape when something goes wrong.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to just point out that this freedom to choose doesn't mean that we always elect to just shrug it off and smile and keep going. We have the ability to choose to react emotionally to situations. The question is, are we doing that impulsively, or are we doing that after careful consideration of the outcome we're looking to achieve? Sometimes we talk about the stimulus and response model, and people think that the expectation is that we're going to have a robotic response to all stimulus, or as Lauren said, we're always going to see the most optimistic, aspect of everything. That's not necessarily what we're suggesting, right? Bad shit happens, and a negative emotional response be the most appropriate thing for you to do. What we're proposing is that you choose that response rather than have it be an impulsive reaction that causes you to regret the outcome or do more damage than the initial stimulus in the first place. That's what we saw in the reading, right? If we had left it at a spilled cup of coffee, then we might have been able to avoid much of the rest of the bad things that happened throughout the day and avoid the damage to the relationships that probably will outlast the day itself. So stimulus and response, freedom to choose. This is really about, self-awareness, the application of independent will. In the further reading that you are welcome to do, and I encourage you to do, there are a number of anecdotes that talk about the 90-10 principle and this concept of proactively choosing your responses and managing your reactions. One of those stories is a young lady who was a home health aide. She was a nurse, and she had a job working for an ungrateful, ugly, really horrible client. And she would go to work every day, and the gentleman that she was responsible for serving as a home health aide was rude to her, was belittling to her, really made life miserable. And it made her miserable. And she would go home at the end of the day, and she was, essentially taking it out on her family, because she was upset with the way she had to operate at work. She was, less kind to her husband. She was less patient with her children. And that stimulus, her client being an ass, was leading to responses that were negative in other aspects of her life. And what she eventually learned is that was a choice that she made, that she could go to work every day in this same environment with this same rude, ugly, ungrateful individual and just smile and whistle and do the work that she was there to do and respond with optimism and positivity and kindness, and then leave that and go home at the end of the day and just put it completely behind her and say, I'm not going to let one ungrateful human being affect the rest of my life. And that is, this Eleanor Roosevelt quote, "No one can hurt you without your consent." I hear the phrase, "you make me feel," quite a bit, right? You make me feel stupid. You make me feel unloved. You make me feel this. That's really giving a lot of power to somebody else. It's just different language. You make me feel X is different than when you do this, right? This is how I interpret what you're doing. But you can't really make me feel any one way. That's up to me. I choose how I'm going to feel. The stories of Viktor Frankl, if you're not familiar with Viktor Frankl, he was in the concentration camps during the Holocaust, and his entire family was killed. He suffered through the horrors of the camps. And what he came to believe and what he came to appreciate about his circumstances was that while his captors, right, the soldiers that were guarding the camp had more liberty, right? They could move around freely. They could leave the camp at the end of the day. They had more liberty. Viktor Frankl concluded that he actually had more freedom than they did, because he was free to believe the things he believed. He was free to maintain an optimistic outlook on life and positivity in the face of some of the most horrific and tragic treatment of one human being by another. That's a pretty powerful example of stimulus and response and using self-awareness and independent will to manage your own outlook on life. Right? This Gandhi quote, I think comes back to this notion of Viktor Frankl, is they can't take away our self-respect if we do not give it to them. Right? You can strip me naked and whip me and parade me in front of the camp, but you can't take away my self-respect. That's only something that I can give to you. It can't be taken. One of the other quotes that we use in class is, I am what I am today because of the choices I made yesterday. And ultimately, when we talk about proactivity, what we're saying is that you are responsible for you. It's really as simple as that. You are responsible for you. And the more we recognize that difficult circumstances and difficult experiences are inevitable, right? That they are a fact of life, but our most difficult experiences are the crucibles that forge our character. Right? It's easy to be happy and kind and optimistic when everything is going well, but it's when the shit hits the fan that our true character is forged. And that is really the underlying message of proactivity, is it's up to us. Any other thoughts on this subject as you read the reading or contemplated your own experiences with the 90-10 principle?
Well, how do you manage the impulses are pretty quick, way faster than your brain. They just happen. How do you manage that? Because how can you move from moving with only impulses to moving to where you make yourself have time to make the right decision?
Yeah, well, I mean, how many times have somebody said, take a deep breath, count to 10? Those are the tricks, right? It's training yourself. Take a deep breath, count to 10, give yourself time in that little arrow between stimulus and response, right? Because by nature, an impulse comes quickly and without thinking. And so it is only with discipline and maturity that we can recognize those impulses and try our best to hold them back. It's not that if you mess up and your impulse races ahead of your brain, what do? See, maybe the problem is not enough of you are married. What's the thing you do when you screw up?
You apologize.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I reacted to that too quickly. I should have taken a second to think about the impact that I was going to have with my response, and I apologize. And after you have to do that, 10, 12, 100, 1,000 times, maybe, that take a deep breath, count to 10 will start to sink in. Our reactions have impacts on other people. And ultimately, we're trying to make ourselves happy. We're trying to modulate the big swings in our emotional reactions. But we are also attempting to mitigate the negative impact that we can have on other people and their day and their moods by subordinating an impulse to a value.
I think for me, a part of this that you kind of touched on earlier that's important is just that I think there's a delicate balance between controlling your reaction maturely and suppressing your negative emotions. Like, I think something that goes hand in hand with controlling your reactions is being able to maturely and constructively acknowledge that you have a negative feeling about something, because I've noticed sometimes people will embody this principle on the surface and really try really hard to be positive about something or to not react negatively, but then in the process end up kind of suppressing negative emotions that then can explode later, or can invalidate someone else's negative feelings about something. I think it's important I think that's another aspect of the maturity that you discussed, is just being able to say, okay, this is not great, and then the next step is, how am I going to react, instead of always just being even though that is in our control, I think it's good to acknowledge when something outside of our control is negatively impacting us.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes crying is the most appropriate response. And as a leader of an organization, sometimes a relatively explosive negative reaction to a situation can have a positive impact, right? Particularly if you are known as someone who is relatively level-headed and in control. If you every once in a while have a controlled explosion about something you're extremely unhappy about, it's much more impactful than if you're known as a hothead who, can be set off at the slightest, small thing. So again, responses don't have to be uniformly positive. Sometimes it's appropriate if they have some negative connotation to them, and sometimes they can be quite powerful if you're used in the right way and you're not overusing a angry reaction to a situation where you essentially become the boy who cried wolf and no one listens to you anymore. Melinda, do you have any experience with this?
No, none at all. I was going to add too that I think when we were younger and first coming up through the world in the business world, we didn't have texting and these kind of social media things that can set you off as well. And I've tried to teach my kids that, if they get a text from somebody and it kind of hits them crossways, that not to respond in text, that's the time to pick up the phone and have a voice conversation, because I feel like you can really lose the meaning of things. And I think that's just another element of this 90-10 rule that, this generation has to deal with, is people are willing to say things in text or willing to say things in other arenas that they wouldn't say to your face or on the phone. And, you've got to know to control those situations as well.
In a leadership capacity, I think most people would say Bill rarely loses his cool, but we always know when he's pissed. Is that fair? So, I mean, it's not that I'm suppressing a negative response, but I do attempt to modulate the volume and the emotion that goes into that negative response without losing the impact of the message I'm trying to communicate.
Can I add to this?
Please.
I think that, like, earlier I had said, like, when I was younger, I made stupid decisions. And I think one of those things that I have kind of evolved in was I used to be really responsive because I would just react right away before thinking. And one thing that I've really had to learn is patience, to be patient. And fully process and think about everything, and think about, like, the outcome if I respond this way as opposed to the outcome if I respond this way. But that's definitely something that I've had to, like, really try at and, like, evolve into. And it's something that that we are also trying to teach our kids here. We actually have a sign that hangs in our hallway that says, "You are free to choose, but you are not free to choose the consequences." And we just kind of explain to them that the consequence is what you decide. Like, you can choose to have a good, positive outcome, and that consequence could be a good thing, or the consequence could be a bad thing, but a consequence isn't always negative. So that's, like, constant, like, reminder every time we all walk by it for all of us. But I think that it's definitely something that doesn't come natural to everyone. You have to kind of work at it and learn and evolve into it. But I think that learning patience and learning my own responses has helped me kind of get better at doing that and not being as reactive as quickly.
Diane, you are becoming your parents right before our eyes.
I don't know if that's a good thing.
You have signs in the hall and everything.
Can I add to what Melinda was saying? Cody B, who's down here, and I have a question about this. He owns a light phone instead of it's like a smart dumb phone. So it can't do all the same things as a regular smartphone, and I think it helps him gauge his responses and take some time, actually, than the quickness of these smartphones and everything that we see and all the stimulus. And I'm wondering for business, if that's okay, to do, to change that type of phone. He's not getting photos from people or those kinds of things, he does get some text, but it's a little bit slower process. And I think kind of been a good example for me, because I'm pretty quick with I'm pretty up on the smartphone.
Yeah, I mean, the new feature on Tinder is called Are You Sure? And it basically adds a step between what you write and pressing send. And the feature is actually called Are You Sure? They're using AI to read what you wrote, and if the AI flags what you wrote as potentially, incendiary or embarrassing, it pops up. Are you sure? So I think we could all use a little bit of "Are you sure?" in our day-to-day communications, whether it's via smartphone, or in face-to-face conversations. So this whole idea of the 90-10 principle is about you taking responsibility for you, right? And, anytime that the thought enters your head that the problem is somebody else, that thought itself is the problem. And in psychology, there's a concept called determinism, which essentially is the antithesis of taking responsibility. Determinism essentially places the blame on who you are on somebody else. So, we can talk about genetic determinism, that basically says, hey, I am who I am because of my grandparents, right? It's my personality is baked into my DNA. Hey, I'm Italian. I'm a hothead. It's not my fault, right? It's genetic. And you hear these things where people are essentially blaming, their family tree for negative aspects of their character, which is kind of silly when you think about it. The second type of determinism that you hear quite a bit is psychic, right? It's my parents did it to me. I am a miserable son of a bitch because I was raised by a miserable son of a bitch. Not exactly taking responsibility for your actions or having any agency over yourself. And the last one is environmental. It's whoever, my boss, my colleagues, the economy. I can't really control who I am, and I'm not responsible for my actions because of this environment that I work or live in. There used to be a T-shirt, I never had it, but it said, it's hard to soar like an eagle when you work with turkeys. That's an environmental determinism message. What I like to say is, proactive people use different language, and they're careful about the language that they use. I mentioned "you make me feel" as one of those phrases. That's a very reactive phrase, right? That means I'm not in control. I'm giving control to somebody else. You make me feel this way. I had a student in class, pretty common conversation that I have with students. One of them told me, I can't come to class next week because I have to lead a fraternity meeting. And said, okay. What do you mean you have to lead a fraternity meeting? Well, I'm an officer, and I'm in the chapter, and we have a meeting on that day, so I have to lead a fraternity meeting. I said, is that really true? Or have you decided that meeting is more important than this class? It's like, well, I'm an officer, I have to do it. Like, think about what you're saying. Is it really true you have to? why don't you tell me the truth? Why don't you say, Bill, I've made a decision that I would rather lead my fraternity meeting than come to your class, because that's a much more honest way to communicate the decisions that you've made. You're blaming the fraternity on the fact that you can't come to my class, when in fact, the only person that you can realistically blame for making that decision is yourself. Right? So proactive people use different language. And the thing that you should think about is if the language you're using is attempting to deflect blame, place blame somewhere else, push it outside of your control, then you're really behaving in a more reactive fashion, right? Proactive people don't blame and they don't play the victim. And as a leader, probably the most important management technique you can do for yourself is wake up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror and say, everything that happens today is my fault. If something good happens, it's my fault. If something bad happens, it's my fault. You're the leader, right? The buck stops here. Whatever happens, whatever gets screwed up, it is your fault. And then you'll be in the most appropriate mindset to start your day and really take leadership actions, because the reality is things are going to happen. And if you're going to assume the responsibility for leadership, that means that you're assuming responsibility for the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. Proactivity is about making things happen. We tend to think about proactivity as a synonym for initiative. And it can be a synonym for initiative, but it goes beyond that. It's not just being a go-getter. Proactivity is a mindset, right? It is a mindset of control, right? It's actually putting your hand on the wheel and driving the car rather than being driven. I have a young lady that has worked for Melinda and I now for 12 years. And when she was in school, she started off as an intern working for us. And upon graduation, we wanted to hire her on a full-time basis. And so Melinda and I took her to lunch at Grins in San Marcos, and we agreed as in the parking lot before we went in that we weren't going to offer her a job unless she asked for it. And so we sat down at lunch, the three of us, we started telling her how much we loved her, how impressed we were with the work she did, how phenomenal she was, how much value she'd added to the organization. And she just was, thank you, oh, thank you, oh, that's great, thank you so much. And Melinda and I are just looking at each other like, my God, is this woman ever going to ask for a job? We start talking about all the work that we need to do and all the projects that we have on our plate that we don't have the capacity to get to, and she just keeps eating her French fries. So after lunch in the parking lot, I told her, I said, hey, you might want, if you're interested, you might want to just ask Melinda if she has any more work for you, because there might be a chance that she would have a full-time role for you. And she goes, really? Wow. Like, oh my God, please. So proactivity can be synonymous with initiative, but ultimately we're talking about more than just get up and go. We're talking about a mindset that We accept responsibility for our own actions. We don't blame others for our failures. We make commitments and we keep our promises. When we talk about language, here are some more examples. So instead of I have to lead a fraternity meeting, I can't come to class. Other examples of reactive language: there's nothing I can do. That's just the way I am. He makes me so mad. They won't allow that. I always love that one. They won't allow that. First question, who is they exactly? I'm a little vague on who the they is that won't allow that. I can't, I must, if only, rather than just taking those same scenarios and those same situations and using different words, right? Let's look at all our alternatives. Let's choose a different approach. I'm in control. Everything is figure outable. I choose, I prefer, I will. These are the things that really increase our circle of influence. When we talk about influence as leadership, that was one of our definitions from last week. The more proactive we are, the more influence we have. So reactive people actually shrink their circle of influence, where proactive people in leadership roles are much more influential. I think this starts with mindset. Thibaut, you asked, how do you get good at this? It starts in the morning with deciding what kind of day you want to have, right? It starts with understanding that as a leader, the buck stops with you, and that you have to assume responsibility for the good stuff and the bad. As young professionals starting out in your career, you need to start building a base of confidence in your ability to control your environment and to control your destiny. There's a admiral that ultimately became the chancellor of the UT system that gave a commencement speech 7 or 8 years ago titled "Make Your Bed." And that was his message to graduates, right? Wake up in the morning and make your bed. It's a simple task. It's the very first thing you can do in the morning to demonstrate that you have control and that you're accomplishing things. Knowing students the way I do, I would back that up a little bit and say, your first task is actually getting your ass out of bed in the morning, right? Give yourself that victory. It's called one push-up, right? We're gonna do exercise, one push-up a day, push yourself out of bed. Give yourself that victory that you're being proactive, you're taking initiative, and once you've done that, you can set yourself in the proper mindset. Ultimately, proactive people have influence and they lead. Summary of these, right? Major in fearlessness. Don't be concerned about what's going to happen. Recognize that life is uncertain, and every day is going to be a mixture of good stuff and bad stuff, right? The stimulus that we are subjected to in leadership roles is just a non-stop, constant flow of actions and information heading our way. Don't make excuses ever, right? And avoid the victim mentality. Right? We're not victims. I recognize that some of us may have had traumatic experiences. Some of us may have had more difficulty in our upbringing than others. And that's tough. And you may need some help, but that doesn't mean you're not ultimately responsible for yourself. The last message I have for you on the idea of proactivity is one of my good friends, Kaylee Sloan, used to teach this class with me. This was her quote: "Proactive people make their own weather." And if you think about people that you know, some of them just walk around with a ray of sunshine beaming down around them at all times. And some people are like that old Peanuts character, with the cloud just following along everywhere they go. Do you want to be Eeyore, or do you want to be Tigger? And we all know people that are Eeyore day in, day out. And hopefully you've got a few Tiggers in your life. But this is up to us. You can kind of come down the stairs in the morning, plodding and pounding on the steps, or you can get up on your toes and bounce down the steps and greet the day. It's really up to you. So this concludes our hour on the topic of the 90-10 principle and proactivity. I'd like to hear anything that you may have to say in reaction to these messages. How about you, Rose? You have a puppy.
Yes, so I guess I can relate based on my dog's barking. So I guess for me, if I want to do a dog related example, this is very helpful because it can basically keep me sticking to a training schedule instead of just letting them out of their crates when they bark and all of that kind of stuff, because it ends up being better for them in the end. Just, a random example, but you can apply it to small things like that. So I guess I had some real life examples during this call.
How do we know when you are upset?
How do you know when I'm upset?
Yeah.
Generally, I am not super outwardly reactive.
This is hence my question.
Yeah. So I generally will process on my own, either by writing or talking to someone else unrelated, and then come back to the issue to talk through it again in a way where I'm not just in an emotional state, more factual based. So that's kind of how I get through situations when I'm upset generally.
Do you hear that, Tebow? Any other thoughts on this topic?
I was just going to say,
Rose,
go ahead. I was just going to say that I don't know if you remember our conversation. Some people on here may not know this, but I was married 30 years and I've been divorced for a couple now. It was pretty traumatic for me. And obviously one of the very first people I told was Bill, because, he's been in my life since I was 17. We're very close. And I was very upset when I was telling him, and he was incredibly sympathetic, and he sat there with me and let me kind of cry about it. And he said, well, I'm going to give you a couple of months to throw yourself a pity party. And then you're going to get on with living, you know, you're going to get on with getting on. And I just remember thinking, that's crazy. I just, you know, but it stuck with me. It was like you said, that was an appropriate response, was being depressed for a couple of months. I mean, a 30-year marriage, that you can't forget about that in a day. But it didn't mean that the rest of my life needed to change, and actually could change for the better. So my reaction to that and what happened to me completely changed my life. The reaction that I could have had could have been so detrimental. So I use the 90-10 rule every day during that process. But you know, you should be allowed to be upset when it's okay to be upset, but at some point you need to get on with living. And that's pretty much what Bill told me that day, and that's what I did. So
yeah, we use 90-10 around the office, you know, and within our friend group, right? When things happen and you can tell that someone's about to blow up, you just go 90-10, 90-10, you know. You know, when the airplane gets a flat tire, you know, life just, you know, and the more you're out there living it, the more opportunity there are for things to go wrong. And it's nice when you're surrounded by people that have the same mindset and have the same ability to not only control their own impulses, but to point out to you when you need to be doing the same.
Well, did the guy in the article, in the little text, did the guy have friends or people in his surrounding that was helping him to see the situation differently? I don't believe so.
Yeah, no, it's always great to have someone go 90-10, 90-10, you know, take a deep breath, count to 10, we're all good. There are very few things that are going to leave a permanent mark. Well, thank you all for the time today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll look forward to continuing this. I think we're shifting to Thursday of next week, just to make sure that with the 4th of July holiday, we didn't lose folks that were getting out a little bit early. So you'll receive a message about the content and the expectations of preparation for that conversation. And I will look forward to speaking with each of you then.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank you.